Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Bark Night Podcast. This is your host, Patrick. And today with me, I have Robin Block, who is a director and producer, as well as the CEO of CreatorVC. So, Robin, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself and a little bit of background, how you got here, and why you're here today?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So I set up CreatorVC nearly 6 years ago now to develop crowd-funded documentaries. We've released, I think we've got our 8th release coming up later this year. We've been quite prolific as a production company in developing projects and releasing them. We're probably best known for our 80s horror documentary franchise In Search of Darkness, which is now one of the most successful independent documentaries ever made. And we have a new format called Expanded, which is designed to be able to look at individual movies and games. So the first expanded movie the first documentary we've used under this expanded format is for the movie Aliens, James Cameron, 1986. That's coming out in a few months, so that's in the final process of post-production. And the next in that series under that format, we hope, will be The Thing expanded. And that's what's really exciting. So my job right now is to kind of reach out to the fan base of The Thing and understand what you would want to see in a documentary focused on that movie. I suppose the only other thing I would say about CreatorVC is that we have around 80,000 backers now, and what we're known for is kind of fan-funded documentaries. So the kind of work we do and the stuff that gets us really exciting is really creating kind of manifestations of fandom, and bringing a whole community behind a project and making it happen. And that's what we're looking to do again with The Thing.
That's awesome. So I did catch up on. I had seen the In Search of Darkness documentaries out there before you and I had gotten in contact, and they were on my watch list for a long time. And I finally watched them, and they were great.
Thank you.
So nice job on those. I looked into the Aliens one in preparation for this, and that looks awesome. I can't wait to actually watch that one because I'm a big fan of that movie as well.
Yeah, I mean, so the way we work with our backers is we have a very sort of intimate relationship with them. And with something like Aliens Expanded, we've had a whole year of kind of interactive events. So we had loads of cast members come in and join us for live Q&As with backers, and people that run like dedicated fan communities and podcasts for Aliens come in, and we've gone on sort of tangents and rabbit holes. But the documentary itself, we sent a 5-hour rough cut out to about 200 of our backers just before Christmas to allow them to critique it. And it's come back with some of the best scores that we've ever had for one of our documentaries at that stage. So that was a 5-hour rough cut. The actual runtime of the documentary, because we'll cut it down a bit. Oh, that's fun. We'll cut it down a bit. Will be 4 hours. And the edit with the score that I'm looking at the moment, because I'm being sent sections, is outstanding, and I'm so excited. I think that the timing of this release, which will be May for our backers, for Aliens Expanded, is going to be amazing. So yeah, hugely excited about that project. It's good to hear you see that. I mean, we've done sci-fi before. Excuse me. The highest grossing crowdfunded documentary ever is a documentary that we created called In Search of Tomorrow, which is about 80s sci-fi movies, which is about 5 hours long, and that had 17,000 backers. So that was a huge project.
Yeah, that's massive.
Yeah, and while we're known for sort of these big kind of epic documentaries, which are kind of like nostalgia fest, where you just dip and dive into movies, which people love, right? I also want to be able to do really deep dives and go down rabbit holes. And it's almost kind of like, let's bring all the fans of a movie together and create something that we can all get super excited about. And one of the other things about Aliens Expanded was that before we did any crowdfunding or a pre-sale, we went out to all the kind of people that run all the big fandoms for Aliens and said, look, we're going to do this. We want to involve you. So they all joined what we call an advisor circle. And then we presented them with a synopsis. I think it was like a 6-page synopsis. Like, this is the roadmap for the documentary. And that got peer reviewed, almost like it's a medical paper. It got peer reviewed by over 3,000 Aliens fans. And then we took their feedback, presented it again. And then we went into our first pre-sale campaign, which was back in September 2022. And it comes out now in May. And so that process and that kind of level of intimacy between who we create our work for and the work that we're making, that's unprecedented in this field. I think we're the only ones in the world that do it that way.
Yeah, and I mean, the timing on that is absolutely perfect because you have the new Fede Alvarez movie coming out this summer. You have the new 4K physical release of Aliens coming out in March. So, I mean, big year for that franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to sort of be, part of that conversation. Aliens Expanded, we've got like half the cast in there. Probably the two standouts, I would say, would be Lance Henriksen and Michael Biehn, who appear in Aliens Expanded. It's directed by a friend of mine called Ian Nathan, who is a very well-known film journalist and author. He used to edit Empire magazine, which is like the premium, the best film magazine in Europe, essentially. So it's been a fantastic production, and yeah, I cannot wait to get it out there. I'll tell you something else. When I was watching the rough cut, it's the first film we've ever done where I've sort of cried, in a good way. Like it got me emotionally. And my wife was looking at me like, what's happening to you? And I was watching the rough cut with like video glasses on in bed, and I was all tears, because it is emotional. It's an emotional film. I think the part that got to me was about Bill Paxton. So it's sort of, I'm really excited. I think that out of everything we've ever done, Aliens Expanded is the closest we've come to really speaking for fandom, like creating something not for a Netflix audience, not for Amazon Prime, but for like 10,000 super fans. That's who, the work that we create is really focused on the intimacy that we have with an audience. So coming on today to talk to you about The Thing Expanded and the movie The Thing, we've learned a lot from doing Aliens Expanded, and I want to sort of create an even more kind of spectacular experience for fans of The Thing, because as I'm having these conversations and speaking to lots of people, and we're having hundreds of people sign up to our survey, we're listening to the fan base, I'm starting to see a lot of patterns in what the fan base wants to see in this kind of project and how they feel about this movie. And it's very unusual. It's some of the data that I'm getting back is really interesting. So we can get into all of that. It's you tell me what you want to do.
Yeah. So that's a great point to just. Why don't you do a deep dive into what your vision is for The Thing Expanded? Tell me what you can about it.
Yeah. So The Thing. If you're a horror fan, I would never. I would never say this is the best movie or that is the best movie. Like when anyone asks me what my favorite movie is, it changes. I have a selection, but it's very hard to argue against The Thing not being on the Mount Rushmore of horror movies, right? And for a whole bunch of reasons. And I think there's something that, if I look at the demographic from the people that are responding to the survey, it's really interesting. So it's 86% men. So if you're not a man, please sign up to the survey and represent yourself. But also, it's 75% people over the age of 36. So what I'm seeing in the data that we're getting back from the survey is that it's almost like a generational thing. And there's a lot of stories all happening at once. There's a story of the thing being made, and there's some great making ofs that are available on the Blu-rays or even on YouTube now. But there's also the story of the thing and how it took 15 years to find its audience, how it's like the underdog. There's something very relatable about something failing and then being rediscovered and then absolutely being revered. There's also the story of how the fandom, it's a story of the internet, really, how the fandom has then projected itself back onto the film. So you have all these rabbit holes, these fan theories, which we absolutely want to discuss. And the format we have for an expanded is, I've got some motion graphics I can show you, but essentially if you imagine like an editing timeline, but in 3 dimensions with the thing on it, and it's sliced up into all its kind of key scenes, we're just flying in to that editing timeline, expanding the scene, understanding what the motivations are, understanding what's happening, going down tangents, going down rabbit holes. But we use the narrative and the chronology of the film as the chronology of the documentary. So we start at the opening shot and we end at the last shot of the movie. And we're going to take all the super fans of the thing on this ride through the movie. And the way that I know we've done our job right is that after you watch the thing expanded, the first thing you want to do is rewatch the thing. The second way I know we've done our job right is that when you watch the thing, you see it in a new way. So our role, really, with all our work, is to take something that you love, that you know intimately, and create even more value out of it for you. And I think that because our approach with this is kind of laser focused, and the target audience for this, we know absolutely love this movie. I could talk to you about any scene in the thing, and you know where I was. You'd see it in your mind. It's one of those rare movies that just has that. So the vision, that's for the documentary, but the actual vision for the experience is to bring all the fans together and have this year-long celebration of the movie. So we'd get surviving cast members, crew members together. We get experts on the thing, writers, journalists, and we'll go down all these additional rabbit holes on the way to completing that documentary. And I want it to be something that fans of that movie can absolutely cherish, that they feel part of.
And what's really interesting is that you say that everybody sort of, has those scenes in their head. I've watched that movie so many times, and every time I watch it, it's almost like a new experience because I notice new things every time, and like over time, it's one of the reasons I think it sort of has stood the test of time is because it's a mystery, it's dissectable. You can take this movie, you can look at it, and you can say, okay, when did everybody become infected? And you can, just figuring that out, they do not show most of the characters, so figuring out just that part of it. And the last couple times I've watched it was solely for the purpose of trying to realize that. And I had my phone out and I'm taking a list and I'm like, all right. So this person I think was right here, this person, but you never know, and I think that's one of the reasons is because you're able to you're able to analyze each of these scenes and be like, all right, Wilford Brimley, you probably should have been a little bit more careful during your autopsy, for example. He's you're seeing him getting the juices on his arms and everything, and it's all right, so it was probably here for him, and it's slowly taking him over cell by cell throughout the movie. But being able to sort of capture those details with each viewing on things you're like, oh, all right, I think that might be what's going on here.
It's interesting because that's the mark of a great film. There's a saying, which I'm probably going to get wrong a little bit, so bear with me, but the same man doesn't step in the same river twice, right? Because the river's different and you're different. And I apply it to movies because I watched a thing when I was very young, probably about 6 or 7 years old. I remember the chest bursting scene and like viscerally. But then I watched it as a teenager and loved it. I've watched it in my 20s and loved it. And I went to the cinema about 3 or 4 weeks ago in London at the British Film Institute. Amazing cinema, massive screen, 4K, Saturday night, packed theatre. And I related to the movie as a 46-year-old man in a way that I didn't when I was 26. And that's the mark of a great movie. And when I went in to watch it again, knowing that I was working on this project, I thought, well, I'm going to watch this really critically, right? Because, I need to really start thinking around corners here. But I couldn't, because as soon as the first shot hits, you're kind of in that world. And what's remarkable about that movie is that it doesn't have any fat on it. There's movies in the early 80s that the pacing compared to modern cinema is much slower. No, it doesn't waste any time. James Cameron's very good at that as well. He just gets on with things quite quickly. But also there's an authenticity and an intensity and a truth to the performances, the environment. The environment is a performance. It all works so well together that you're immediately drawn into the reality of the situation. Like, at no point during that movie am I thinking this is an actor, right? And I tried to be critical watching it, thinking, oh, I've got to look at people's performances and start, no, I was in it. And that's the mark of a great movie. And the other thing that you mentioned is that you can revisit it and see different things. So it has that, I call it density to it, because every time I watch it, I see something new. When we started working on the expanded format, I knew that a lot of movies we couldn't do what we want to do with them because they don't have enough depth. They can be great movies, but they have 2 dimensions. But great movies have 3 dimensions. Aliens, there's so much to talk about and look at, and there's loads to explore. It's the same with The Thing. And that's what makes it really, really interesting. And when you start doing research online about the movie and about the projection that the fandom has, it's insane. The amount of essays and articles and people picking over every fine detail, to me, that makes it such an extraordinary subject to cover. And also, it's a super fun movie. Like, it's just hugely entertaining. It appeals to the 14-year-old boy in me. It appeals to the more cerebral 40-year-old in me, right? Like, that's, and it is, and I feel like sometimes movies, they get lucky with the timing. Everyone's at that peak. Rob Bottin has discovered himself. John Carpenter, for me, it's his most accomplished work. John Carpenter is on form. And then it has these other stories, these meta narratives. This derailed Carpenter's career. He's never got over it. We interviewed him for In Search of Darkness, and he was still a bit broken about it. And it was supposed to be this huge hit, and it wasn't. And even though there's something melancholy and sad about that, because even though I would argue it is one of the most revered and celebrated movies in cinema, period, I don't know if Carpenter really understands whether that's made up for it, And so I think it's a very special film. I also think the fandom is really special. When you do what I do and you work with various fandoms, you get a sense of kind of like their vibration, their sensibility, what you mustn't say, what you've got, different groups of people you have to operate a little bit differently around. But with The Thing, it's like this sort of brotherhood. Like, it's just, if you're down with The Thing, like, you're cool. It's like we all understand why we're here. And I haven't had a bad conversation about this movie ever.
Yeah, it is one of those things that comes up in I almost have to in my podcast episodes. Like, there's a couple people I've had on multiple times, and I'm like, all right, so we're talking about this today. Like right now, for example, I'm doing an episode on snow-themed horror movies, and with one of my guest hosts that I've had on many times, and I'm like, okay, in advance, we cannot spend the whole episode talking about The Thing. Like we've talked about it so many times. We could easily spend 2 hours, 3 hours just talking about that movie, but we need to we need to stay on task. So that's one of the things. It's like, it's very easy to just
A huge challenge
all day.
It's a huge challenge because the thing about great art, right? Great art will ensure that it gets stolen. So you can see a kind of hierarchy through the decades that have, followed 1982 of games, movies, pop culture that have taken ideas directly from The Thing and repurposed them. You can't say snow-themed horror film and not talk about The Thing, even if it's almost like an unconscious bias. I've got a post on our social media which is Thing Expanded, going out I think tonight, where we've just listed like a handful of other IPs that are referenced The Thing, from Stranger Things to, even right now at the time of this recording, we've got True Detective, the new series of True Detective, which
that's on there.
I think there's a line between homage and you can cross it, and I think they've crossed it a little bit because they've taken too much, they've paid too much reverence to The Thing. They've taken out whole bits of dialogue and repurposed them. Some of the characters in True Detective are the same names of the character. It's too much, and it does.
They have a character named Blair.
Yeah, and they talk about Clark, and like it's that for me, the challenge with that is I get it, but it's too much. It takes me out of the reality of the world you're creating. It was like that Zack Snyder film recently where they were just like giving a homage to Aliens, and I couldn't take it seriously because it was too strong. Army of the Dead, I think it was. They'd taken whole sequences and repurposed them from Aliens, and I was like, that's not going to endear me to your movie. It's pushing me away because it's not excuse me, it's not a clever homage. It's too much. But from movies, games, tons of computer games, it's interesting, but that only happens when you have great art.
Yeah, one that I think was done really well is The Hateful Eight. The subtle references to the movie in The Hateful Eight are done so well that, like, the shot of just a guy walking to the outhouse out back, and you're like, oh my god, this looks like it could be from The Thing, and then you realize, like, oh, that's his point, and then you realize that Ennio Morricone did the score for both, and you're like, oh, okay, and he used the more you like dive on it, you're like, oh, okay, I see exactly what they're doing here. But like on a surface level, you're not picking up on all those things immediately. It's just like, hey, you know what? This kind of reminds me of The Thing.
It's interesting because the top of my contributor wish list for The Thing Expanded isn't John Carpenter. It's excuse me. It's Rob Bottin and Quentin Tarantino. And
Quentin Tarantino interviews so well.
Absolutely.
I bet he would have a lot to say.
And I think there's no one off limits. I mean, we've already interviewed John Carpenter about The Thing at length. I interviewed in Atlanta Keith David for In Search of Darkness, who was just so much fun. But what I'm not trying to do is create a making of. Obviously, there'll be elements of that because people want to unpack the special effects and the practical effects. But I want to get some of the biggest effects people in the world that have been influenced by Bottin's work and others talking about it. So I want it to be a really fresh retrospective on that movie where we go into it in real detail and we deconstruct why certain things work so well. And I want you coming out of this experience knowing more than you went in, but ultimately I want you to get more out of this movie. If this is this film, if you have like 2 or 3 editions of this movie, then this project is the right fit for you. If you have a Thing poster hanging up in your man cave or person cave, then this project is for you because I don't love every movie. There are certain films that have stayed with me all my life really, and have formed part of my identity. And I devour anything that I can about them still. But I want to create something which is a really premium experience, which gives you a lot more about something you love already. And that's the whole kind of concept with the expanded documentary format, is that we can go wherever we want.
Yeah, and that sounds awesome. Are you so you're going to do an entire segment just on the special effects?
Very lightly. I mean, so in terms of our, that's when we do. This is why it's so important that fans complete the survey, because we don't want to miss anything. Like, the reason that we do the survey, and we do multiple surveys through a production process, is because it allows us to tailor and create a really intimate product market fit, because we're serving 10,000 fans rather than like a million people on Netflix. We can be really sort of narrow and laser focused on what we deliver. But one of the things that's already coming through the survey is like, let's unpack the special effects, let's unpack the practical effects, let's look at how they've influenced everything else. I definitely want to get the director of the prequel, the modern prequel, on board. I like the prequel, right? I as a standalone film, I enjoy it, and I try not to compare it to the 82 version, but I think that was still made with love, and I think there was studio stuff that went on which curtailed what it could have been. I think that's really interesting to unpack. There's also the computer game, which kind of extends that narrative. There's the Dark Horse comics, so there's lots of stuff to explore here, and I think that's going to be really fun. But practical effects, absolutely. When I look through the survey at the moment, that's coming up a lot, and it's something we have to look at, because we're not looking at them at the time, we're looking at them 40 years later, and
how they've aged over
and so much of it still absolutely bangs. Like, when I was in this film screening a few weeks ago, there were people in there that had never seen the thing before, and I could hear them reacting to some of the more visceral moments. And what I took away from that is that this is still an incredibly powerful movie if you haven't seen it. And Tom Savini in Search of Darkness, it's become a meme now, but he kind of has this quote where he says, "Old movies aren't old if you haven't seen them before."
Yeah. I saw him say that, because I like I said, I just watched it recently, and all I could think about was the fact that, like, I have a collection of movies I hear are absolute classics that I haven't watched yet, because I'm like, you know what, I always want to have a couple, like, just movies that I'm just blown away by, that I'm like, I want to see for the first time, that I'm just kind of holding off on, like, for example, I've never seen Near Dark with Bill Paxton, never seen that. Here it's unbelievable, holding off on it. I've never seen Dark Star by John Carpenter. I've heard sort of mixed things about it. It's his first movie, but I hear it's an experience. You see where he's going to go with everything.
Yeah, I think a Dark Star is, it's got Dan O'Bannon in it on screen, and it shows. I don't think it shows. I think what he followed up with took everything to another level, right? Halloween took everything to another level. I think, it's like when they talk about Tarantino's first movie, which is, I think, My Best Friend's Wedding, which isn't, like, it's sort of, everyone thinks of his first movie as Reservoir Dogs, and it's like that with Dark Star. But Near Dark is one of those movies that kind of cool horror fans get. And it's got Catherine Bigelow, it's got Lance Henriksen, and Jeanette Goldstein, and Bill Paxton, who then all go on to be in Aliens.
Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to that one. But I think that Tom Savini's point there of, like, seeing something for the first time, like, that really holds up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of very disillusioned with modern cinema. I look at what's on at my local cinema where I live, and It's like the multiplex near where I live, and very rarely am I, unless it's like an event movie, do I feel motivated to go. But what's great now is you've got IMDb, you've got Letterboxd. Even in Search of Darkness, I haven't seen all the movies that are covered in Search of Darkness, and every day somebody mentions us online saying, I discovered this movie because of your documentary, to the point where we actually supply in the booklets, in the Blu-rays, like a checklist of movies we feature. And we even have on our kind of link tree in our bio a printable version of all the movies we cover in the In Search of Darkness trilogy, because people, that's part of the appeal, it's discovering movies that you haven't seen. And you get completionists. I need to come up with some kind of cool award. Like if you've watched everything we've covered, you need to get something.
Right, like a badge of honor.
Yeah,
to them.
yeah. Excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something I think those documentaries did really well. Is as I was watching it, I was like, this really puts in perspective how many movies I haven't seen. And that was, I think, it's almost like the inverse of the expanded, because you're doing year by year, and all of these movies, and you're taking 3, 4, 5 minutes on each one. But in this one, you're taking however long it ends up being, 4 hours or whatever, and doing a deep dive on all these topics, the Thing and for Aliens.
Yeah, I mean, when I was putting together In Search of Darkness, I was really following a feeling. I was being drawn to VHS cover art. I was being drawn to that feeling of going to the video rental store and just looking at the covers.
Yeah,
and discovering.
And I think that's something for people with our age too, of just remembering what it was like to go to video stores. It's something that people nowadays, they'll never know that feeling.
They'll never know it, and there's something about having to live with your selection. So it was like when you bought an album just for one track, but you had to listen to the album till you got all the other songs. No, we all want instant gratification now. But within Search of Darkness, when I put that together, I knew really early on that I'd hit upon something that people aligned with. I never knew the juggernaut it's become. I didn't see that early on. But doing this work now on The Thing expanded, and seeing who emails me, and the speed at which people are starting to latch onto it and show interest in it, it reminds me of when we did In Search of Darkness. And it's hugely exciting, because within Search of Darkness we had such a responsibility to do justice to the subject matter, and I think we did. It's the largest assembly of horror icons ever made on screen. The total runtime of the trilogy is about 15 hours, and we're working now on the 4th installment, which is 1990s. We're going into 1994.
That's exciting.
With The Thing expanded, the pressure is on to do justice to a film that the horror community holds so highly in their hearts, has such reverence around everyone attached to it, and our job is to accurately reflect the love that movie has back on its fans. That's our role in all of this, and it's not something we take lightly. I'm putting together an advisor circle now of journalists and writers who have written books on The Thing, who are kind of huge experts, and they're all excited about it. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to get too frightened.
So I have a couple questions here that I prepared for a little bit of a Q&A session. So let's jump into that.
Go for it.
So first off, and you've kind of answered a lot of this as we went along, but I would still like to ask it. So what made you decide to do The Thing for this one?
2 reasons. One, we're doubling down on our horror audience. So our most successful franchise is In Search of Darkness, and the audience generally, the horror audience, are insatiable to learn more about what they love. right? Or to get more out of what they love. Secondly, we can't do this with every horror movie. It has to be a kind of perfect movie in order to fit within this expanded format. Aliens is one, but The Thing is another. And The Thing is predominantly a horror film, but it has sci-fi overtures. It has that density, as I mentioned earlier. So it was really the next project we wanted to do. And now now we've almost finished work on Aliens Expanded, and I'm really happy with that. I want to take that format even further, iterate on it even more. And there isn't a better subject matter than The Thing. It's like, it's the perfect movie for this format. And putting them two together, I want to create I want to create cinema history. I want the people that back and join this journey with us, I want them to be forever connected in a kind of physical way to the film and that universe.
That's great. What are some of the topics you do plan on exploring in there? I know we've mentioned a few of them as we went along, and you've mentioned that the surveys are leading that conversation a little bit, but are there certain ones that you're like, we need to talk about this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the format is we want to go through all the major scenes and deconstruct them. But in terms of tangents and themes we can explore, I want to unpack paranoia. I want to unpack not just the how-to of the practical effects, because a lot of that's been covered in previous kind of documentaries, but I want to understand how the practical effects has inspired new generations of effects makers, and where they see that. And another important element is the references. How has the kind of cultural trickle-down effect influenced modern cinema, modern pop culture? How are we our collective cultural conscious, how has that been shifted by this film, this piece of great art, which is still relevant, we're still talking about it today. I've got a Google Insights kind of alert whenever a new The Thing article comes out, and it's beeping every week. Every week I get in my inbox 2 or 3 articles of film writers and publishers still talking about this film. I definitely want to explore that. I want to explore the AIDS allegory. There was 2 films that came out in the 80s that people projected that onto. The first was The Thing, which in 82, it was kind of like at the height of that AIDS kind of the awareness of that. And also The Thing as well. And The Thing and The Fly have a lot in common in terms of just very graphic, memorable, practical effects. And there's tons of other stuff. There's I want to explore fan theories, and there's so many. And there's some really funny ones and really entertaining ones. I don't necessarily want the documentary to end up at some definitive conclusion.
Right.
There's a lot. I can tell you actually where we are in our timeline. Right. So we haven't even communicated to our 80,000 strong backer list that we're even doing this. We haven't emailed them because we've got other projects happening coming out before this one. So I'm sort of doing this now, this kind of groundwork under the radar. But our timeline is we have 3 months this year to really go hard, which is May, June, July this year, 2024. And July is what we've earmarked as the pre-sale campaign. And we want to get the film ready by the end of Q4 2025. So that's our kind of timeline for this project. And doing the groundwork now, getting the word out, having these conversations is so vital, because what we'll do, if you sign up to the survey, if you follow us at The Thing Expanded, you'll see there's a kind of link in our bio. And you've taken the survey. It's not difficult. It's pretty simple. But that's the beginning. That's the beginning of a dialogue we want to have with the fan base, because in a few months' time we'll come back to you with a synopsis saying, well, we've listened, and this is basically the roadmap for what we want to create. criticize us constructively, hopefully, but tell us what's missing. Tell us, what you like about it, and we'll come back to you. We'll iterate until in July this year we will sort of go to market with an all singing, all dancing sort of contributor list and value proposition. Which, if I know that I will have done my job right if you're a fan of the thing and you see what we're doing and it's presented in the right way. It'll be polarizing. It'll be like, I have to be part of this, because it will never happen again.
Yeah, and it makes complete sense. And I think that sort of figuring out what these topics are that are important to people, I think that's great. And making people feel like you've built that community, that they're involved, that they have their input. I think that's really important. One of the things you mentioned too is, sorry, go ahead.
I was about to say, when we do a project and it's well received, we know about it. People write to us. People say lovely things on social media. Not everybody, but like a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's the best feeling in the world, because often we've had to work hard to get that. I think because of the nature of our commercial model that we are, fan funded, we do use pre-sale campaigns to generate the funds to create a project, means that our backers have such a greater input on the outcome, and I love it, because you end up working with a group of people that you've worked with for 12 to sort of 15 months, that you kind of build this relationship with, and you're all on the same page. And through our social media, through the newsletters, through the actual online events that we have all the way through, it becomes this whole period of time where we've all grown to kind of together around this project. It's interesting, we've got a preview screening happening in London in March for Aliens Expanded, which is part of our marketing function, but we are going to invite UK backers. That we've got limited seating, but it'll be in a cinema in London. And I was talking to our advisor circle, who run all the different fan groups. This is on Sunday, and I was getting messages from them about how excited they are about this project, because they've seen the rough cut, and where the film is now compared to the rough cut is like, it's a quantum leap. All the score's been added, and it's super polished and that kind of stuff. And I know from the feedback I get from them that it's been a journey for them. In London as well, where myself and my director Ian Nathan are based, we did a meetup when Aliens was playing at the cinema, and a bunch of backers came down, and we just had the afternoon together and went to see the movie together. And they all felt a bit more connected to the movie because they were part of this project. And I think that's what we sell. We actually sell nostalgia, and we sell intimacy to something that you love. And bringing everyone together around that vision isn't always easy, but when it works, it creates something very special. And you watched In Search of Darkness. Yep. The reason, if you go on eBay and you try and pick up a Blu-ray, they're hundreds of dollars. I've seen In Search of Darkness collector's editions go for like $1,000 on eBay. And the reason that people pay so much for them is because when we do a physical media run, we just do it for the people that have backed it. It's not on, you can't get it on Amazon, it's not on general release, and there's a value there. And when people have it, they don't want to get rid of it because their name's in it, it's part of them. That whole experience of putting it together, they've been part of that. And I think that's even more focused when we tackle a single film.
Do you plan on doing any new releases of those on physical media?
Yeah, we're doing. I've actually got it up here. So this is the trilogy box set, and we're not re-releasing like this, but we are re-releasing the trilogy. It's on one disc, but it's got a new booklet. And the next time that will be available will be October this year.
It's good timing.
And then I think in the future we actually have a website called insearchofdarkness.com, which has about 35 hours of additional material that didn't go into the into the documentaries. I mean, I think in the future at some point we might put that on an extra Blu-ray and repackage it and push it out, but it won't be for a couple of years. But it's sort of, and that'll all be on pre-order as well. So we never sort of we don't have a warehouse full of this stuff which you can just buy. We kind of manufacture to order, and I think part of that is it makes our sort of business a little bit easier, but also we want the physical manifestation of something you love. I want it to have a value. I want it to be really expensive on eBay because it's worth something, and that's really important. I mean, I feel like I can't point to another documentary that aftermarket. Sometimes I see some of the prices, like even our posters go for, or the pins, or and I'm just like, wow, and it's I think they're good, but it's not what I think. It's the value that other people perceive on it, and I put it down to the fact that if you're a backer on these projects, I feel like people get value from it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think that so it was interesting because that just reminded me. The first one was nearly impossible to find. I wasn't able to watch the first one, only the second and third, because they were on Shudder, but the first one was not streaming anywhere.
I don't know why it's not on Shudder. It should be on Shudder. I need to contact Shudder because I've had a whole bunch of messages, and I'm like, "Why are you asking me? Like, go and ask Shudder." It's actually you can get a digital copy if you go to 80s Horror. If you go to 80s Horror Doc on Instagram or Twitter and you click our link in bio, you can download a digital copy of part one. It's interesting. I've had people get tattoos of our artwork. People have the posters framed. I get letters and emails from people sometimes talking about how the series is like an emotional comfort blanket. Like they'll just have it on in the background. It's weird because I think why that series has been successful is I think that they're really engaging. David Weiner did a phenomenal job on directing and writing them. They wouldn't be what they are without him, 100%. But I think they work both as something you can binge watch in stages, but also just have on the background. If you're feeling that vibe and you can't pick a horror movie that you want to watch, have that on, and just you get that hit, that kind of 80s horror nostalgia hit from just having it on the background. And certainly, it'll get late in the evening and I'll think, oh God, I'm in the mood to watch like an 80s horror movie, but I won't have the sort of focus or energy to invest in a 90-minute feature. So, I'll sometimes go onto YouTube and watch short retrospectives about movies I like, and it's basically a kind of like souped up premium version of that, but with like all the people that made them and were in them. So you get all these interesting stories and all that kind of stuff. So I think ultimately, with something like In Search of Darkness, I just think if you're into it, you get a lot of value, but it's just fun. Like it's just entertaining.
Well, and it's fun to see what these horror icons think of other horror movies, like, oh, what does Keith David think of, all these other slashers from the 80s? He was in a fair amount of, he's been in a ton of movies throughout his life. He's done a ton of horror movies, but what does he think about all these ones that he's not in? It's interesting to hear that.
I'm one of these people that I'm definitely not a film critic. Like I need to, if I watch a movie, sometimes I need someone to sit down with me afterwards and explain what I've just seen. Right, and I like that. And one of the things that I really like about In Search of Darkness, as a fan of the series, is when there's the editor of Fangoria, a guy called Phil Nobile Jr. Whenever he talks about a movie, he talks about it in such an eloquent, educated, charismatic way that it makes me understand the movie he's talking about in a different way, and I get more entertainment out of it. He'll explain to me stuff that I didn't see first time. And in a way, that's what the expanded documentary wants to accomplish. We want to be able to give you more out of something you think you've experienced, but actually have you experienced it on this level.
Yeah. Do you know who you'll be featuring on the thing? Like what
it's too early for
celebrities
that.
will be there yet?
Yeah, I've got a wish list. Somebody actually just sent me Rob Bottin's phone number. I'm going to see if I can make him an offer he can't refuse. But it's too early, so we won't even start looking at casting until probably May. But I want to get the best people in the world, the most interesting, charismatic speakers on the thing. I want to track down as many of the people that were close to the production as possible. Unfortunately, with a 40-year-old film, many of them aren't around. But with the expanded format, people are always going to point to Kurt Russell and John Carpenter, and it would be brilliant. We've already had John Carpenter talk about the thing with us, but Kurt Russell would be a huge get. But the format doesn't rely on the filmmakers being present, because it's about the film. It's not about the filmmakers. Though of course they'll be talked about, they'll be featured through archive, but it's about deconstructing this movie. But I would say the two biggest goals for me on this project would be Rob Bottin. That would be a huge coup, and Quentin Tarantino.
That would be awesome.
Who I think we probably could get. So, fingers crossed. But essentially, I've got a vision in my mind of how I want to feel as a viewer, and I really want this to be a very educated, deep love letter to this film.
Well, and it's interesting too because the number of times, like you said, Kurt Russell and John Carpenter have been interviewed about this is countless. But the number of times Quentin Tarantino has been interviewed about this, which obviously he's a fan when you see the influence, but that's limited. So yeah, that's great.
Thanks a lot for having me on, by the way, for talking about this. I mean, I've been talking about this film and this project for about 3 weeks. And whenever I have these kind of conversations, I'm like buzzing. And like what's really hard in my job is if you're pushing things uphill, you're trying to get people interested in a project. But I'm not having any kind of I think sometimes you get the timing right. With Aliens Expanded, you talked about it earlier, they've got the new movie, they've got the 4K release, all of that kind of stuff, right? We're actually, our final campaign ends on Alien Day in April. But part of that was luck. I didn't sit there and go, well, they're making a movie, and just sometimes there's stuff in the air that all kind of congregates, right? And timing is so important, and timing can work for you or against you. If you look at the release of the thing, the timing was awful. They had Blade Runner, they had E.T., they had Reaganomics. Like, they didn't want the cinema public wanted happy, optimistic. They didn't want desolate. All the narrative ties haven't been tied up by the end. They didn't want that, and it was bad timing. Within Such Darkness, it was just amazing timing. That sometimes ideas just go off. If you go with the tide, like they just carry on, and that's what I'm sensing with this. So I'm just going with it. I'm kind of collecting up opinions, ideas, recording. When someone writes to me or even comments on our social media about, "Oh, have you thought about this?" I'm like, well, I probably haven't. I'm gonna steal that. We're gonna do something with that, and that's what I love about it, because it's such a collaborative process, the way we put these projects together. And it's like a little snowball, and you're building and building and building. And that's why I'm doing it so early now. I don't have a synopsis. We don't even have a landing page. The link goes straight to a Google form. But hoovering up these ideas from the audience that really cares enough to actually fill out a survey, that's gold for us. And I'd also add that ideas are at their most fragile when they're embryonic. And so I'm open to changing course. Like this synopsis is not written yet. You know, there's too much almost to pack even to a 4-hour documentary. So stuff's going to have to go, but there'll be stuff we really want to focus on, and it's working out what the most important elements are.
Yeah. I will say, you know, I don't even know if I put this in the survey, but I think including sections on the video game, the board games, you know, because there's 3 different board games out there. I've played one of them, and a brand new one just came out last year. But just all these different ways that people have found to enjoy it in a different way. I think that's been it's so impressive to see.
Yeah, certainly the game will definitely cover. The board game, it's difficult because when you start veering off into merchandise, and it's the board game's an experience, but it's a collective experience. The game is a much closer to a cinematic experience, and it has a narrative as well. So it's easier for us to cover. With Aliens Expanded, you know, I still get messages going, "Are you covering Alien War?" That was at the Hippodrome in London, and we're like, "No." The focus is on them. We're not covering like the extended. We can't. We've only got 4 hours, and the film's got so much in it that we're just having to get through that. But you know, those are fun decisions to make. And what's interesting is, you know, sending out a 5-hour rough cut to your backers, getting feedback, and then like basically editing it down to 4 hours means that everything in there is there for a reason.
Yeah.
You know, and it's kind of all killer, no filler, and things are better through editing. You know, with In Search of Darkness 3 was 5 hours, 41 minutes, something insane like that. But we couldn't have got it any shorter. It doesn't feel like that when you're watching it. And, you know, good editing is important.
Yeah. Well, that's all the time we have for today. So I guess the last question I have for you is, if somebody wants to get involved, if somebody wants to do the survey, how do they do that? How do they get in touch with you?
I think that the easiest thing to do is we're on Facebook, Twitter or X, and Instagram, and the handle is @thingexpanded, one word. And if you go to the link in the bio, it'll link you straight to the survey. You know, if all the comments I'm reading, all the survey responses I'm reading, we're actually taking some of the more fascinating responses and actually repurposing them as social media posts on that channel as well. You know, my job is to sort of get the dialogue going around social, around this movie, around this project, and the responses to the survey are really fueling that. So if you love the thing and you think this sounds like a cool project, please get in touch, get involved. You know, and it's small now; it's going to grow over the next few months. And if you have an opinion on something and there's something that you want us to cover, just need to let us know.
Great. Well, thank you for coming on, and you know, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And I think that as this pushes along further, I would love to have you back on and talk about where things have begun to head. Look at some of those storyboards, graphics, everything that you've got gathered, and you know, maybe even take a look at some of the data that you've gathered from the surveys.
Yeah, absolutely. I was on a podcast the other day and I brought up the survey data, the qualitative stuff where it's bars, not like individual emails and stuff. So we're very protective around data protection, but it was just really interesting. So I'd love to come back on. I think, you know, I'd love to share with you when we have a synopsis that you can read and critique. And then, you know, when we hopefully go into production and when we're in post-production, we're definitely going to reach out to our backers with a rough cut again, because that's such a good, it's scary for us because, you know, there's no motion grade, like it's a rough cut. And you have to almost frame it and say, don't tell us about bad sound, because we know we haven't done the sound mix yet. There's no score. It's just a placeholder score. But I've never had a bad experience doing it. It's always made the final product better, and having that level of interaction makes us as filmmakers vulnerable, but ultimately it makes the experience of backers much better. and I definitely want to repeat that again. So, the more dialogue, the better, all the way through this.
Great. Well, once again, thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Patrick. Thank you.